Hello there. My name's Tyreek Cooper, and I'm doing the Thomas Valva case for my child welfare class. The reason I decided to do this case is because it had one of the most profound effects on child welfare as a whole in recent history. Because of this case, there was major changes in policy in the state of New York and how they handle and delegate their cases coming forward. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the presentation. So here's the family tree. You have Thomas Valva, who is the victim, 8 years old, aged 8. Anthony Valva, who's his older brother, aged 10. If you look at the picture right here, he's the one that's at the far right. Andrew Valva, who's the youngest brother, age 6, on the far left of this photo. Justine Zuboko Valva, sorry if I mispronounced her name, but she is the mother, and her occupation's unknown, but she's very key and essential to this case. As you'll see in the coming slide, she's in the middle of this photo. Michael Valva, who you'll see in the next slide, he's the father and the perpetrator in this case. He's a New York police officer, and his wife, or not his wife, his fiance, I'm sorry, his fiance, who's also the stepmother of Thomas Valva and his two siblings, Anthony and Andrew. And she's a head nurse in a hospital in New York. Okay, so now getting into the details of the case, you see this all began back in January 17th of this year. So it's a very recent case where Thomas Valva had an unfortunate and untimely death at the hands of his parents. Really, they put him and his brother Anthony in a freezing cold, rigid garage with no heater, no covers, no nothing, as a form of punishment. And mind you, this is still winter. This is still the middle of winter, so temperatures were reaching as low as 17. And in the morning, the next morning when it rolled around, he died of hypothermia. This was just a very sad case. So going into what happened after that, on February 6th, this is when the court process began. The initial hearing, in which Michael and his wife Angelina, they pleaded not guilty to the murder of their son. And then going into later, where there was actually a history with this household of cases being reported, of allegations and reports being made of child abuse and neglect to this household multiple times. There was a rumor around the neighborhood that labeled this house the House of Horrors, which in this video the judge references himself. And CPS in New York, Child Protective Services, they really didn't do their due diligence in this case. They should have been more forward, and really done more investigation, because there was just too many reports and there wasn't any progress in any of those reports. You figure with all, I guess, the outside protective factors, he's a police officer, the father's a police officer, has a nice job, nice house, the children are still going to school daily, but still, and even then, there was reports that professionals at the school had made about this particular family. So you would figure after a while there'd be some more investigation going on, but I guess not, unfortunately. A new recent development in the case, since Michael was dismissed from his position in the police force, I guess he was claimed as not being able to afford a lawyer. So now they're using taxpayer dollars to defend someone who obviously murdered their own son. Just bad allocation of resources, in my opinion. But who am I? I live in Jersey. So, going on to the next slide. So, watching the video from the previous slide, you could just see the hurt and distraught and despair that the mother, Yasunya, went through. It's a very sad experience, probably sad time of her life. And this is why I put the code up here, because this is the question that many people are asking that are involved with the child protective system. I kept thinking about all the institutions who have failed to help him, who completely did absolutely nothing, and now everyone is trying to do the right thing. But where were you when they were begging for help? It's just a very sad thing, and it's true. It's just seen time and time again. We're social workers, and here we are. Seemingly, we're not always going to be able to do our job perfectly, but to fail to this degree, it is a very big disappointment, and it's sad. It's sad. So as a result, you can see the effects that Thomas's case had as a whole in the state of New York. It was monumental, to say the least. Now they started to get the ball rolling after this unfortunate and tragic accident. Well, not even accident, event unfolded, and it was seemingly it could have been prevented. But now this is why these laws, this is why these policies are being changed, because they need to be, or else something else like this can happen again. If you watch the video, it'll talk about how the social workers, they're in counseling. I think it said about 60 of them are in counseling. How anything over 4 reports needs a very deep dive, needs to be investigated intuitively, needs to, and that's how it should have been before, because there was over 16 reports. There was over 16 reports of child abuse and neglect in this household alone. So, finally glad something's being done about this. But you can also see from the criminal justice aspect of things and how judges are handling these cases. It's very sad that the mother just seemingly, she's doing everything that she can, and it seems like she's powerless in this case. Like, nobody's helping her out. It's like everybody's her enemy, and she was right about the abuse that was happening. I read somewhere that she wrote a 75 page letter to U.S. Attorney General William Barr, asking for the Justice Department's intervention, and she had no reply. I think it was after this encounter she had with this judge here, but it's very unfortunate to see that nothing's being done, even after all of the struggle. It's very disappointing. And hopefully in the near future, things will change. So, like I said in a previous slide, this is the problem that's still existing. Child protective services, mainly the workers for them, are being negligible with these cases. They're not putting enough forefront, they're not putting enough effort, enough resources, enough work into getting these children into safety, into a good, safe, permanent placement. And it's sad. 6 months after, I'll link this into the references below. It's going to be the very last reference by Newsday. 6 months after Yatsunya, the mother, she wrote that 75-page letter to the U.S. attorney. William Barr, this is the death happened, the death of her son, Thomas. It was sad. So now we just have to see how things are moving forward. And with that, um, it you could say that the public is blind to all of this. We were blind to all of this entirely, and we only it's unfortunate that it takes a death for us to see what's happening behind the scenes, how much work, how much effort's really going on into these things behind the scenes. Looking into the perspectives of the case, you get to see the outlooks and the possible thoughts and reasonings of why those involved in the case did the things that they did, and the why they could have thought the way that they thought during this case. But before that, I want to take a look at a particular part of the audience that is viewing this case, and that would be the feminists. Any feminists that are looking at this may have a perspective that aligns with CPS not helping, CPS and Judge Zimmerman not helping or heeding Ms. Zetsunia's words of her children being abused and the situation becoming worse than it ever could, and that by giving her a voice, this would have been much more. This would have had a better ending, say the least. So it's just very sad. So now looking into Michael and Angelina's perspective, they may have thought that they were justified in doing what they did, either due to their upbringing or possible mental issues, any other mitigated factors that could have played into this. Possible intention to use the system as a barrier, evidenced by Michael's career as an officer, so he could have used that as a form of invisibility to, I guess, avoid any unwanted attention and whatnot. So it's just very sad. Michael stated that he felt trauma after Thomas's death, so there's pre and post trauma. There could be some post trauma from what he did, and that could be stacking up, and he could be feeling regretful for some of the things that he's done to his other children. So that's both of their perspectives right there. The mother's perspective, Jasunia's perspectives. She knew earlier on about Michael's abusive nature, promiscuous tendencies that he displayed openly around the children. She blames the system because they didn't do anything about it. They didn't heed her warning. They only left the children there to suffer. And it's just a very sad thing because she's receiving primary and secondary abuse because she sees her children suffering and going through this, but it's also primary abuse from the system itself and how the system isn't doing anything. It's actually oppressing her and not helping her in the slightest. Child Protective Services, this is their perspective, felt that it was inadequate evidence to move forward with the reports, which is why they were often dropped, possibly felt justified following the status quo and not going with their gut. It's just now left with changing the system itself as the only form of repentance. So it's really now type of a go big or go home type of thing, to where now since the public is involved and now since we all know what's going on, they have to make a change. NYPD, they were heavily involved in this because they had ample opportunity to go invest Michael's home. I'm pretty sure that rumors made it back into the police station. Calls were probably made to the police, so it was probably due to just his report at the office. He probably did a good job being an officer. That a lot of the police just dismissed what was going on. You know, protect your own, I guess. And the court perspective, many concerned with the mother's financial capability. In a recent article, it said that she was actually experiencing foreclosure at her house. So being an immigrant, being single income, and even just being a woman in America, to where in a big city or a big state such as New York, where you have some of the highest property taxes, highest cost of living, it's hard to live there, hard to find a job, very population heavy, so competition's high. It's very unfortunate for her in this case to even try to claim custody of her children while Michael has dual income because him and his fiance both have really good jobs. They continue to have their children get an education. From the outside looking in, nice house, all the resources they could possibly ask for. So yeah, it's just a very convoluted case. And when you do involve all these perspectives, you do get a better understanding of why this kind of sort of happened this way. But it's not justifiable. And it's still, this is still not enough evidence or reason for both the court and CPS to not move forward and further along and not be more involved with it. So I'm not gonna take too much time. I just realized how much time I was taking. But you can read this stuff below. So this is basically the dynamics and the factors within the family. The stuff in purple are kind of the primary effects that affected the children and their well-being. Firstly, anything in red is secondary effects to either the children or anybody in the case. And there's only one violent one. That was the for the mother, and that was more of a primary one. So yeah. So here's the list of outcomes from most likely to least likely. Zetunia will get help from different forms of social services in order to help her family become more, or not her family, but herself, more financially stable. She will gain custody of the 2 surviving children, and both Michael and Angelina will either serve the full or the most of their term in prison. There's also a possibility that they might serve a longer term to the rejection of their plea, depending on if their case is seen as aggravated or not. So since they didn't take that original plea and pleaded guilty, they refused the plea bargain. So that might play a role into them going longer, because now they're making the state work harder to prove if this case was really guilty or not, which we all know the answer to that. And the lesser outcomes, Yatsunya possibly won't get custody of her children until her financial circumstances improve, but she may still be able to visit them, and if they're placed in the system or if they're placed in adoption. And Michael and Angelina are still sentenced, and this last one most likely won't happen. Zetsunya, I keep saying her name differently every time I say it. Jetsunya may not be able to get custody of her children, despite the potential stability that they are placed in. They're still placed in the system. Both Michael and Angelina get a light sentence or are somehow acquitted. That probably won't happen. I just thought I'd put it down there. But just to update, she does right now. I just read an article because I'm keeping up with this case. She does have custody of them temporarily for now. If it were me, prevention first and foremost. I would start by actually doing my job, not basing a conclusion on outside appearances alone. Look at the occurrence of how often this family is being reported about. That's number one. That's a big red flag right there. Try my best to advocate for the mother, since no one else is. She's being heavily discriminated against. It's sad and it's obvious how oppressed and how seemingly powerless she is in this situation despite her efforts. I feel real bad for her. Getting these children into different placements and research the psychological, biological, and social family history. And this is intervention, so this is if like I were to be involved, I guess, after this case or during this specific case, so like a before and after. Search the psychological, biological, and social family history. Focus on getting these children with their mother and continue to help her in court. Being within your own family is very important for development. So I would try to get her, especially as hard as she's working, try to get her with their family, with their mother, as soon as possible, and help her get as much social services and advocacy as possible. Therapy for the children, and definitely for both Michael and Angelina. I do believe in restorative justice. I don't, even though the public may think or may believe they deserve to rot, I do believe that there still needs to be some restoration here, because if there isn't, the cycle is just going to repeat. Keeping up with changes made in the system and research how often evaluations are taken for the NYPD. NYPD, they need to change some stuff up in there as well, because just seeing the mental state that Michael had to be in to even do that to his children. I know initially getting within the NYPD, there's a very intensive psychological test, but I wonder how consistent they are with that, if they continue to do so, if they're not. And talking with legislation, make sure nothing like this happens again. Obviously, here are my references. Don't got much to say here. And thank you for taking the time to watch this very, very long presentation. Stay safe, and thank you again. Have a good one.